All right.
Okay, good morning, everybody. Happy Friday. Thank you. That's fantastic. Okay. Maybe I can ask you, Gabby, to make sure it's running. Just keep running. If I get a spam call, we'll just ignore it. Okay, hello, good morning. I'm running behind. Recap, what did we talk about last time? Recap of Wednesday. Forget already? Yes. Okay, so what branches of the nervous system are those?
The autonomic.
Yes. So we talked about the ANS, or the autonomic nervous system. And as you just said, Angela, they break down into parasympathetic and sympathetic. Okay? So we talked about this last time, and we're going to go into this more now, what they actually do and what they look like. Okay? So what are the parts of these? We have the sympathetic division of the 4 F's. I kind of stopped here. Fight, flight, fright, or F, that one. Activated during extreme situations, or what your brain perceives to be an extreme situation. Emergencies, excitement, exercise, and I changed it to erotic stimuli because they're all E's. It's easy to remember. 4 F's, 4 E's. E, F. I don't know, but it's a good way to sort of remember. This is the part of your nervous system that is mobilized when you need to do stuff. You need fuel. You need to activate. You need to move. Sympathetic responses help us respond to dangerous situations as well. So even things that are perceived as dangerous, not just getting attacked by a saber-toothed tiger, right? That doesn't happen anymore. But what could be examples of things that you perceive to be a dangerous or emergency situation?
One thing I learned in my anatomy hospital, an example would be if there was like a fire, and then I guess you could do like a reaction and just run faster.
So in a fire,
Yeah,
escaping and running out quicker?
Like a,
Right. Or even something like, what about when you hear a loud noise? Have you ever heard like a loud crack and you kind of like duck instantly and your heart races? And you're like, ooh, just out of nowhere, like a firework or a shot, whatever it is. So they help you to respond to dangerous perceived situations. So these are the things that they actually do. This branch, the sympathetic nervous system, increases heart rate and breathing rate. So respiration and heart rate. Increases blood and oxygen to your skeletal muscles. Your skeletal muscles are your voluntary movement of your body, and so you need to engage them so that they can move you out of that situation. Dilation of the pupils and dilation of the airways. So you actually have respiratory bronchioles inside of your lungs. Bronchioles, bronchi, and bronchioles that are the terminal branches of your airways inside your lungs, and they actually dilate. There's smooth muscle wrapped around them. And with the signals that happen with the sympathetic activation, they actually dilate and they open up. Why would your airways dilate and open up in some situation like this? More oxygen, more air. You're getting more air and more oxygen down into your lungs so you can get more O2, okay? Sweating, okay, what is sweating? You know you get nervous and you just start sweating? You guys ever get that? Yeah. Right, you just start sweating, your hands are sweaty, you're like, oh my God, I'm sweating. I sweat even when I'm not nervous, but moving around fast, just always going. Why would you sweat though? Why would that be a part of a sympathetic mobilizing the body? What does sweat do? So this comes down to the intake memory system. Cools you down, exactly. Cools you down. So when you sweat, and your body's going to be burning, right, and mobilizing and moving and doing all the things it needs to do. So you sweat, it actually will cool you down. As it evaporates, it's going to cool down the skin and the surface underlying. Okay, so usually sweating is a part of this process. Motility of the digestive tract and urinary tracts goes down. Now, do you need to digest your food or have a hungry, growling tummy or pee when you're about to have an emergency? No, that's not necessary. Those things typically shut down. We'll see situations where actually they happen. Someone's so scared, what do? Piss their pants, right? Or crap themselves. Or this is horrible. I'm going to put this on YouTube and people are going to see this. They're like, oh, she's a great professor. Wow, gross. Oh, well. So those kinds of things actually get activated in some people. It's a little crossover of you actually lose control of bowel movements when you're really, really like, scared in your tracks. So, but really in general, they're inhibited. So for most people, for the most part, you don't need peristalsis of the GI tract. That means smooth muscle contractions of your gut, your stomach, your small intestine. And you don't need your bladder and defecation and all those things happening. You don't need to worry about that. You need to get away from the emergency situation, okay? So now for the parasympathetic, which we like to call the rest and digest, this is like what's activated all right now in all of you guys, right? Taking notes, you're thinking, your brain is working, you might be sipping on your coffee, all the normal routine homeostasis functions of your body. Really, it's active when your body is at rest, sleeping or just in a relaxed state. It really conserves energy. So this is not trying to ramp everything up. That burns a lot of energy, okay? If you're just sitting there, you don't need to be burning at a real high rate. You don't need to be breathing fast. Your heart doesn't need to be sped up. Your lungs don't need to be dilated. Conserving energy basal functions, okay? And it directs all the housekeeping activities. What are housekeeping when we say that? That is digestion, right? Normal blood pressure, normal heart rate, normal breathing, normal GI motility, so digestion. If you're hungry, you'll start to feel that you're hungry. If you just ate, you'll be digesting happily in your body. So heart rate and breathing are at low to normal levels, okay? Gastrointestinal tract digests food, so we have peristalsis. That's the segmental contractions of the gut, the stomach down through the intestines. Urination, defecation, those things are going on, right? If you have a full bladder, you need to micturate, you need to go pee. All of those are part of your parasympathetic nervous system. Pupils are constricted. Now, in general, we can trigger sympathetic activation by shining a light, right? Or you walking outside into real bright light conditions. And that is to prevent the back of your retina from being blasted with too much light, okay? So, but in general, this is constriction of the pupils. You don't need a ton of light, you know, all this super clear vision. You'll still have clear vision, but you don't need to blast the back of the retina with light. So those are maintained at a pretty low constriction or a low amount of dilation. Okay, so the two divisions, of course, more than the physiology of how these work, we're going to talk about that more in physiology, but the structure of how these two branches of the autonomic nervous system, how they're constructed, they come off and they're part of nerves that leave the central nervous system in various locations. So here we have the brain and the spinal cord, and we have all those regions of the spinal cord that I had you learn, right? And then we talked about some of the cranial nerves, all of the cranial nerves the other day. That was another thing we went over, is the cranial nerves. But in purple here is shown all the parasympathetic nerves that are part of the peripheral or parasympathetic division of the ANS. Shown in green are all of the neurons, the nerves, that are part of the sympathetic nervous system. And it actually shows the structures that they innervate, okay? And remember, another name for this is the visceral what? When we break down the nervous system, there's 4 divisions based on their function. Remember, we got the somatic sensory, we got the somatic motor, we got the, remember those 4? Yes, visceral, motor. We have sensory information, visceral sensory, and that comes into the brain and helps to make these decisions, but the part that we're actually looking at, the division of the nervous system, peripheral, is the visceral motor. So it's controlling those things that you can't control, right? Involuntary, autonomic. So they issue, these neurons, these nerves, as part of the parasympathetic and sympathetic, they issue from different regions of the central nervous system. So notice the parasympathetic has some coming out of the brainstem and the cervical region, for the most part, of the spinal cord, going all the way down to these organs, that vital organs and gut organs that are buried deep inside of your body, and going down to even your lower abdomen, okay? And genitals down here for the ones coming off the sacral region. And then we have nerves that are coming out from the thoracic and the lumbar region of the spinal cord. And they actually go out to pretty much those same structures. So this is showing that the parasympathetic division comes from, for the most part, the brain and the sacral region of your spinal cord. That's where those nerves issue from. And then the sympathetic division comes out from the thoracic and the lumbar. That's where those nerves leave, and they go out to those various structures. Your eyeball, right, your iris, your salivary glands, your skin. Salivary glands are over here, heart, lungs, stomach, pancreas, liver and gallbladder, bladder, genitals, all those different structures. Okay. And notice, these all go to those same things. They just have different actions. So they have opposing or antagonistic actions on those different structures. Will it go? It will not. Okay. Sympathetic, often it's called the thoracolumbar division because the nerves issue from the thoracic region of the spinal cord and the lumbar region of the spinal cord. The parasympathetic is often called the craniosacral because it comes out of the brain or the cranium and the sacral region of your spinal cord. So we can group these according to where the nerves are coming off your CNS as which part of the autonomic nervous system they are. Okay. So what are the neurotransmitters? There's some important things about these nerves that make up the sympathetic and parasympathetic divisions, and the neurotransmitters that they release. And this is where we get into those neurotransmitters you've all heard of, like epinephrine, norepinephrine. Okay, so that's part of that fight or flight response. So the neurotransmitter released, there's postganglionic axons and preganglionic axons. And this is how I introduce these two neurons that make up pretty much, there's a set of chain of two neurons that make up the autonomic nervous system. And these, remember, cell bodies are always encased inside of a ganglia to kind of keep them protected. So this would be the pre-ganglionic neuron, and that one would be the post-ganglionic neuron. That's it. It's real simple. These branches of the autonomic nervous system are constructed pretty simple. One pre-ganglionic neuron dumps neurotransmitter on the postganglionic neuron. Here's the ganglia, or the ganglion, so there's the pre and there's the post, that's it. So there's the sympathetic, releases norepinephrine, and we call those adrenergic fibers, or adrenergic neurons. Why? Because they release adrenaline, noradrenaline. Noradrenaline and adrenaline are very similar, okay? So release, a lot of times we abbreviate this NE for norepinephrine. The parasympathetic, pre-ganglionic neurons, actually release acetylcholine, ACH. So NE, or norepinephrine, and ACH. Those neurotransmitters distinguish the different branches of the nervous system and what they do, where they act on those neurons and on those organs or structures inside of your body, which is, for the most part, smooth muscle, glands, and smooth muscle, and ducts. That's what gets activated in this response of the parasympathetic and sympathetic divisions. Where have you seen acetylcholine before? Where? You've seen it somewhere. You've heard it. You don't know. Somewhere. Acetylcholine. ACH. Where? Skeletal muscles, neuromuscular junctions. Remember? Remember acetylcholine by big motor neurons? They release acetylcholine that binds onto receptors and triggers that whole sliding filament mechanism inside of all your skeletal muscles. Remember that? If someone gets Botox, you know what it does? All it does is prevents that release of acetylcholine. So it can't trigger muscle contractions. So those areas of the face stay flaccid and kind of paralysis. They can't actually contract. It actually slows down wrinkle formation and is used for back muscle spasms and stuff too. You can get injection. Botox actually binds to and prevents the release of acetylcholine. So where we see acetylcholine, many places in the brain, out of the neuromuscular junctions, out of the muscles, okay, to activate your skeletal muscles, and as part of your parasympathetic nervous system. Rest and digest neurotransmitters, okay? Part of that nervous system. I like this diagram because it kind of shows in a picture how all these neurons are different. How these branches of the nervous system are different from just regular somatic nervous system with your neuromuscular or your motor neurons that go out and synapse on your muscles. So remember, acetylcholine is released at those motor neurons, at those synapses or those neuromuscular junctions. Remember the NMJs out at your skeletal muscles. The effect is stimulatory. So what happens is you have a typical heavily myelinated axon of a motor neuron. This sends its action potential all the way down, right? Current zips down. So in other words, sodium rushes into the cell and it pushes all the way down, making this charge go positive, negative, positive, negative. When it gets to the bottom, that releases, through exocytosis, neurotransmitter. The neurotransmitter out at your neuromuscular junctions is acetylcholine. Now that's what Botox blocks, actually. That releases acetylcholine. Okay, but normally it activates and contract those muscles. That's all voluntary. Now contrast that with the autonomic nervous system, sympathetic versus parasympathetic. As I told you, these are two neuron chains. Very simple. They leave the brain or the spinal cord. They have one neuron. They have a ganglia or a ganglion. That synapse is on the second neuron that goes out to the final tissue, to the final organ, whether it's a smooth muscle or a gland or like your heart. So in this case, we have the sympathetic division. Here's the preganglionic neuron. Here's the postganglionic neuron. And in this case, we have shorter preganglionic neurons and sort of slightly longer postganglionic neurons, which is different from parasympathetic. But in this case, the neurotransmitter right here at the ganglia is acetylcholine, okay? But the final neurotransmitter that's dumped out on the smooth muscle tissue or on the cardiac muscle tissue or on the gland cells is norepinephrine, okay? Adrenaline, noradrenaline, okay? So this is your glands are getting a blast of this to activate whatever response is needed at that time. Now notice, sometimes this effect on those organs can be stimulatory, sometimes it can be inhibitory. That means sometimes it can ramp them up and make something happen, make them contract, and sometimes it can inhibit them and slow them down and block them from moving. In the case of this, which one would be stimulated, which one would be inhibited with this blast of norepinephrine neurotransmitter? Which one would be inhibited? Yes, all of this. So actually this will cause lack of contraction of smooth muscle. It'll stop it and kind of make it, don't do that right now. We don't need to digest. We don't need to go to the bathroom. Just hang tight. Stimulatory effects would then be on things like the heart, right? The bronchioles, the smooth muscle of the lungs, to open up the lungs, open up the airways. There's another section here, a different type of preganglionic and postganglionic apparatus, and this is your adrenal glands. So this structure right here is actually a weird little modified, they're modified postganglionic neurons that turned into this whole nice gland. Its whole job is to make epinephrine and norepinephrine as hormones. So in this case, you have nerves that go right out. Do you know where your adrenals sit? Do you guys know where they are? We haven't really covered that yet. They sit right on top of your kidneys. Little pyramid-shaped little glands, and they sit right on top of your kidneys. There are nerves that go right out to them, these sympathetic nerves, and they release neurotransmitter, ACH, and this triggers basically the inside of these glands to dump out all those hormones that they've been making and storing, okay? And that is epinephrine and norepinephrine. So now those are released as a hormone, and they travel, the definition of a hormone is that it gets dumped into the blood and carried through the blood to target tissues that are far spread throughout your whole body. So not just in that local area. This is just local synaptic effects, local synaptic. What this does, and this is why the fight or flight response can be so strong, it's not just going out to the individual organs and activating them or shutting them off, but it's actually now triggering your adrenals to dump out stress hormones in your bloodstream. Okay, so you have the nervous system effects, and then you have the bloodstream hormone effects. So now your brain within seconds and your body, your blood, your circulation are circulating with adrenaline and norepinephrine. Adrenaline and noradrenaline, right? So the hormone effects bolster the sympathetic effect. So it has a much stronger effect. You get a blast of this. And you guys probably know what I'm talking about, right? When you're super nervous or you're in a big conflict, you feel that blast. You ever get like the jittery, sort of even, like you're starting to get jittery? Ever been like confronted with something that's super scary? Car accident, just almost had this the other day, like a week ago. I couldn't even, it was a crazy situation. Car slammed right in front of me. I mean, right in front of me. And I was going like 80. I shouldn't say that either, but I was going fast. I was going fast, okay? I was going a little fast, but I was paying attention. And it was just a blink of an eye, brake lights, and then he flipped, he swirled, someone hit him, and he spun. He was facing me. And I see his face looking at me. Like, I just started thinking, well, we're gonna crash. My car is smashed, the airbag's gonna deploy, like I had like a split second to think. And all I did is I gassed it. This is counterintuitive, most people will brake, right? Most people, but I kind of gassed it and then broke last second and kind of just did a bob and weave around. There was a car next to me. It ended up being like an 8-car pileup, and I just went right around. I mean, it was crazy. It was like God had his hand on my car and was like, doo doo. And I looked back and I'm like, oh my gosh. And I was sore. I could feel it, my whole body like just tensed up, and then my hands were shaking and my heart was racing. And I was like, oh my gosh. And I had my son on speaker too, and he heard the whole thing. I'm like, oh my God, I'm getting in an accident. And it's just, but it was just one of those things, like you could just feel those coursing through your veins. And then I wasn't back to normal for like 10 or 20 minutes at least. And I just thought, oh my God, so glad to be alive. And that, I think everybody was fine. It was crazy. It was just me and one other person on the freeway at that point. Like, yo, we made it, bro. I don't know how that happened. I don't know how I mean, I had no time. So I can't even really clearly see what happened. But a good example of not just my preganglionic, postganglionic neurons are releasing norepinephrine everywhere, but I had a hormone blast of adrenaline that started circulating through my entire bloodstream. Now, why it does that is so you can mobilize all the parts of your body you have to mobilize, right? And it bolsters that effect. Instead of just neurotransmitter, now you have hormone. You have hormones in your blood. So compare that with the parasympathetic division. These tend to have a longer preganglionic axon, so these go all the way out to the actual structure of the tissue, like all the way out to the heart, all the way out to the GI tract or the genitals. They go all the way down. And then the postganglionic fiber neuron is shorter because it's right out, those ganglia are out in the periphery. So this has a real short one. But ultimately, releases ACH here and releases ACH out on the glands and the structures. So the final neurotransmitter is ACH. And again, it can be either stimulatory or inhibitory in its mechanism, in its actions, depending on the organ. So these all have different receptors that respond differently to ACH, norepinephrine, and acetylcholine, and also epinephrine as well, okay? So that's kind of the ways that they're anatomically and functionally very different. This is the somatic motor nervous system, and this is the visceral motor, branches sympathetic, parasympathetic. Does that make sense? Okay, so we have some different divisions of the parasympathetic. We have the cranial part, so the nerves that come out from the brain. It innervates the organs of the head, the neck, the thorax, and the abdomen. And we have sacral outflow, or neurons, that are part of this parasympathetic preganglionic neurons that come from the sacral region of the spinal cord, and they innervate all the remaining abdominal and pelvic organs. So remember, parasympathetic comes out from the brainstem and the sacral part of the spinal cord. Okay, so the top and the bottom, basically, that's the parasympathetic. Now, think back, cranial nerves, right? We covered all the cranial nerves. We went over their structure, where they're at, and then what they do. How many are there? 12. Do you know those 12? If you don't yet, you should know them, you should learn them, spend time working on them. What was one cranial nerve that I said was very special? It was unique. Vagus. What number is that?
10.
Perfect, okay. You know one of them for sure, yes? So the cranial nerve 10 is the key nerve of the parasympathetic nervous system. That's the one that leaves the brainstem, dips down, and goes to all the structures in your viscera. Helps to maintain this housekeeping, rest, and digest, okay? So if we look at it, we have several that come out, the parasympathetic division. We have cranial nerve 10 right here, coming out of the medulla oblongata. So cranial nerve 10, vagus, and it goes out to all these structures, okay? It goes down to the heart, it goes down to the lungs, and it goes down to other structures down inside your abdominal cavity and all of that, okay? So that's cranial nerve 10. You also have a few other ones that go out to, so cranial nerve 3 goes out to your eyeball. Cranial nerve 7, here it is, goes all the way out to area, right, your lacrimal gland that make tears, basically, okay, so tears, saline production of your eyes. And then we also have cranial nerve 9 that goes out here to your salivary. All these, the 9 right here, these go out to your, 7 and 9 go out to your salivary gland. So part of these are involved in making different types of saliva, salivary action coming from your mouth. So you have these under the tongue, you have in the back of the cheek, and sort of down underneath in the mandibular region. All of those make saliva that has enzymes, mucus and enzymes that help you digest food. So you first start breaking down carbohydrates in the mouth. So all of these cranial nerves, especially cranial nerve 10, are part of the parasympathetic responses, okay? So basically tear production, ciliary ganglia, so basically this is controlling retina, not your retina, your iris, so control aperture of the iris and your pupil, and then also tear production, and then salivary glands making normal saliva, and then heart and lungs. So what would the parasympathetic nervous system do to some of these structures? What would it do to these? It's going to stimulate these or inhibit these? Parasympathetic. Inhibit. You don't need a fast respiration rate. You don't need a fast heart rate, right? So inhibiting those. What's it gonna do to these salivary glands? Parotid, submandibular, sublingual, salivary glands. We'll talk about these later in the GI tract. What's it gonna do to those? Stimulate them, right? So you make saliva. So you can chew, you can eat, you can masticate, you can digest, and, you know, all your food and do all that. What happens when you get super nervous? So you have to get up and give a presentation or a speech or something, you're super nervous. What happens to all this and this?
Heart rate.
Heart rate goes up.
Your mouth feels dry.
Mouth goes dry, yep, right? All those, so these actually stop producing that nice watery saliva. You get that dry mouth. Heart rate goes up, lung respiration rate goes up, bronchioles dilate, all those things happen. So the opposite of this is the sympathetic division. So some of these other nerves that leave, the sacral region, they go out, and this again was from vagus. So vagus continued on this page, dips down into the abdomen, here's the thorax and the head, but it goes all the way down and serves structures also of the abdomen. So liver, gallbladder, stomach, pancreas, that makes all your digestive enzymes. Gut, okay, so your large intestine and your small intestine, your colon and your rectum, also the genitals, the urinary bladder, and the reproductive structures and genitals. So all these come from sacral nerves coming from your parasympathetic nervous system, okay? And all these are going out from parasympathetic nerves that go out. Now notice the ganglia for your sympathetic division are way out right near the final organs, where they terminate. Instead of ganglia being really close to the spinal cord and having a short preganglionic neuron, your parasympathetic has a real long preganglionic neuron, and the ganglia are all dispersed throughout your organs and tissues way out in your body, near where they terminate. That's a major difference between the sympathetic and parasympathetic divisions. Okay, so those are all the genitals, the bladder, all these inner viscera of your body. Oops, did I go too fast? Yes. Okay, so sympathetic, basic organization issues from thoracic to lumbar segments of your spinal cord, okay? Preganglionic fibers from the lateral, they come from your lateral great horn of the spinal cord. Let's take a second. What's the lateral horn of the spinal cord? You know this, we went over this. Remember? Where's the lateral horn? That little piece that's jutting out right there. That's the dorsal horn, that's the ventral horn, and that's the lateral horn. Yes? Okay, so lateral horn, that is actually where those preganglionic neurons originate. They originate from your spinal cord. And there's neurons, of course, coming down from your brain that are taking in all the stimuli and telling you, oh, are you nervous? Is that a threat? Is this an emergency? What's happening? What am I doing? That information goes down through your brain and then activates the preganglionic neuron that leaves the gray matter of your spinal cord. So visceral organs and structures of your superficial body regions, this is where they go out to, the postganglionic neuron goes out to. And there's more ganglia than in the parasympathetic. So more ganglia, more nerves, more branching, more going out to all of your different structures inside of your body, the sympathetic. Why is there more ganglia, more branching, and more activation with the sympathetic versus the parasympathetic division? Why? I heard someone say. Right, that's good. So it needs more support, it needs more activation, it needs more ramping up to get everything going. If you're just resting and digesting and sitting there, it's not that important that you activate this real quick, right? Sympathetic is like, no, we gotta activate this real fast because there's something happening right in front of us. We have a split second to decide, right? With my little car accident almost situation, it was crazy. That was just like a week ago, right before Halloween. It was a split second. I mean, it's like 500 milliseconds. That was it. I had no time to even think. But yet my body responded in all that way, very quickly and then nervously, and then I had shakes for a long time. All right, so sympathetic pathways to the body going out to the periphery, they innervate the sweat glands, the arrector pili muscles, and your peripheral blood vessels. These are the ones that go out to the periphery of your body. So I was talking about the visceral structures, I'll come back to them in a minute, but this is talking about the peripheral parts of your body, the outer part of your body. You've already seen these, you know, the different types of those, right? And the ones that cool us down, and there's good use for that, cooling you down so you can exercise, you can engage, you can do what you have to do. We've also talked about that in the skin. Someone remind me, what's the arrector pili muscles? What are those?
Hair stand up.
Makes your hair stand up, right? Attached to the follicle base of all of your hair follicles, right? Even if you don't have a big hair there, you just have a tiny hair or a pore, it actually contracts and kind of pulls that follicle from the diagonal or orthogonal position to kind of straight up. Causes goosebumps, right? And if you have hair in that area, it kind of makes your hair stand on end. Lots of different reasons and triggers make that happen. Emotional state, temperature being cold, or activation of your sympathetic nervous system. That means you get a nervous feeling, right? A creepy feeling. You guys ever walked in somewhere or saw something or done something, you just got a creeped out feeling for no reason? You're like, ooh, ew. And you say chills? That's what makes those chills, those goosebumps, right? So your sympathetic nervous system has little branches, little postganglionic neurons that go right out to those erector pili muscles and allow you to have that response. Peripheral blood vessels, so going out to your periphery, out to your skin. In some of those areas, in vast areas, those are going to be constricted by sympathetic. You don't need a ton of blood circulation, blood and oxygen going to all these places that you're not going to use. You get a massive dumping though, and opening or dilation of blood vessels going to your skeletal muscles and going to your brain. You need to think and you need to move, right? So peripheral blood vessels are affected dependent on where they are in different ways by norepinephrine and epinephrine coming from your sympathetic nervous system. So I just want you to know what those structures are and what they do. Why are they a part of this sympathetic response? And we show the same diagram in our textbook. We have the same diagram as the parasympathetic, just showing these preganglionic neurons and these postganglionic neurons have a different anatomy or structure than the parasympathetic. And we've already talked about this one before, even though you may not remember it. The sympathetic chain ganglia runs alongside the spinal cord, and actually it's not that long, they're just kind of showing you so you can see spread out. These are the preganglionic neurons, those are the postganglionic neurons. So the two neurons in this branch. And notice the ganglia are actually close to the spinal cord, so the preganglionic neuron is very short, releases acetylcholine on the post, and then the post actually goes way out to the different structures in your body. So those are long. They're in nerves, and those axons are very long. Ultimately releasing what neurotransmitter? Norepinephrine, right? So all of these release norepinephrine. Here we have going out to, again, the lacrimal gland that makes saline, that makes tear production, the iris of your eyeball to control the aperture of your pupil, going out to your nasal mucosa, okay, that makes mucus in the nasal membranes, blood vessels, erector pili, sweat glands out in the skin, salivary glands in the mouth, heart, lungs, liver, gallbladder, stomach, spleen, adrenal gland, which sits right on top of the kidney, so that's your adrenals, which actually is part of your sympathetic nervous system, but it's also part of your endocrine system because it's making hormones. These are acting as hormones when they get young. So this has a 2-for-1 function, the adrenal gland. And then your gut.